Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So Marc Jacobs has been more so in the news recently, and I thought, you know what, let's take a moment to talk about his handbags because truly he is one of the most iconic designers of our time. Of course, we all know his work at Louis Vuitton. He's had his brand for over 40 years at this point, but I wanted to, just in line with my channel, really take a look at his handbags over the years, talk about it, because I think he was a designer when it came to handbags for his own brand. He really responded to the various eras of fashion. Whoever the it girl was at the time, he had a bag for her, be it in like the mid 2000s to like TikTok trends. It's very interesting to look at his work and how he's been so consistent on that front. So I thought today we would talk about some of his most iconic bags. I have a list of 10. I truly could have done more bags, but just for the sake of keeping things within the time frame, let's just keep it at 10. But this video could be hours and hours long if I were being real. The first bag that is on this list is, of course, the Stam bag. So this was one of Marc Jacobs' probably most iconic it bags of the 2000s, probably one of the iconic bags in general of that period, like mid 2000s era, created in 2005. A design that not only defined an era of luxury fashion, but I think it did solidify Marc Jacobs' status as a cultural force in accessories. Again, he was the creative director at Louis Vuitton, but this was really him doing this for his own brand. And of course, this was named after Jessica Stam, a major supermodel, a muse of Marc Jacobs. It's a quilted frame style bag with a kiss lock at the top and a shoulder strap. It's got this also chunky chain, that signature quilting, often in a softer leather like a lambskin. The top kiss lock metal frame, reminiscent of vintage coin purses. And then that metal chain strap, detachable. This is very much taking from like vintage styles, but blown up in like a larger size, felt a little bit more playful. And it was a very popular bag. Lots of celebrities wore this style. It was this perfect merge of vintage elegance with kind of like a downtown cool, edgy vibe. This bag was also very much in line with the explosion of it bags of the 2000s. The Chloe Paddington, the Balenciaga City, the Fendi Spy. That era of handbag, that was kind of like the peak era. Now Marc Jacobs had his own it bag. Just a couple years ago, Marc Jacobs reissued the Stam bag as part of a Stam revival. While the Stam bag was probably one of the most iconic bags. During that period, along the same lines, there was also the Venetia, the Elise, the multi-pocket hobo, the Trish, the Hudson, the Inez. These bags spoke to that boho style, but I also think they could even lean in this sort of cutesy baby doll style that was very much also in. Think baby doll dresses, headbands, ballet flats, the style of Gossip Girl characters to those in reality shows like The Hills. I think of specifically brands like Marc Jacobs to even Chloe at the time really leaned into that sort of aesthetic, boho but cutesy. A lot of the styles were actually very soft, slouchy, very supple. And in the later 2000s, we saw this popular range, the Totally Turnlock, and it was part of Marc by Marc Jacobs. This was his diffusion line. The name came from these signature turnlock closures used on pockets, flaps, or decorative panels. They added this functional and stylish touch, very similar to if I think about like Coach styles. These bags were worn by a lot of celebrities, and Marc by Marc Jacobs, it was a great entry point to the world of handbags. Maybe if you weren't able to get a Louis Vuitton or the Marc Jacobs top line, there was also this diffusion line, and he would have over the years other diffusion lines as well, but I think the Totally Turnlock was one of these defining lines for the brand. Next, I want to talk about the Classic Q line. So this is one of the brand's most popular handbag collections throughout probably the late 2000s to early 2010s. When I think about the Tumblr girl aesthetic, that kind of like indie girl aesthetic, this was definitely that. It was laid back, it was practical, it was everyday. If you're looking for your first branded designer bag, like this was one to go for. You were like a student to, you just needed like a casual everyday bag. There was the Classic Q Hillier Hobo, the Natasha, the Frantote, the Percy. This was a Marc by Marc Jacobs diffusion line, was discontinued in like the mid 2010s. Next, I had to talk about this line because I remember seeing this bag everywhere. The Petal to the Metal line, a Marc by Marc Jacobs line. It was probably one of the brand's most distinctive yet playful handbag collections from the late 2000s, early 2010s. Known for the signature metal bird hardware. It captured that era's love for, I would say, quite indie, quirky, quirky aesthetics. The way like birds were somehow everywhere, be it jewelry, interior, they were also on bags. But these birds, they were instantly recognizable. And I think probably a key reason why the line developed a cult status. These bags were made with like a really nice supple leather that could have that like worn in effortless look. For someone that didn't want something so fussy or rigid, this was that style. It was like this mix of boho meets indie. The line included the Natasha, the Sasha, and the Francesca. There were mini versions. For the next 3 bags, I feel like his brand took a bit of a different direction. First of these bags I want to talk about is the Antonia. A little bit lesser known, but there were a lot of bags that were created at this time that were a little bit less loud, not obvious branded birds or like logo plaques or things like that. It felt a little bit more structured, elegant. Again, a departure from that like slouchy indie girl aesthetic. It leaned to something a little bit more refined, a little bit more polished, a little bit more ladylike. It was this top handle satchel, almost like a doctor bag like silhouette. It was very versatile. It had the 2 rolled handles firmly attached, but some styles came with a detachable shoulder strap, full top front closure. Second of this list is the Incognito bag, released around fall 2014. The brand was moving in more of an elevated direction, and I think it also reflected this post-it bag fatigue of the 2000s to early 2010s. More shoppers were gravitating towards discretion, longevity, craftsmanship, kind of a lot of the things we've seen the past couple years. Next of these 3 bags that I also wanted to mention was the Gotham. Again, mid 2010s, offering something a little bit more streamlined, a little more city cool, functional design aesthetic, hence the name Gotham. During this period, some of the designs just felt a little bit more pared down, again, like the Incognito or the Antonia. So the next bag I want to talk about, so we're moving in a bit of a different direction in 2016. We talked about kind of like the boho-esque styles, the indie styles, the more polished satchel styles. Well, 2016 I think was such a defining year in handbags because we would see the rise of these crossbody logo branded camera bags, and of course Marc Jacobs, spring 2016, had his own style, and this was the Snapshot bag, probably one of the most recognizable, probably one of their most commercially successful bags of the mid-late 2010s. It was compact, it was bold, it was endlessly customizable, and it became just instantly, like, I think of like the social media blogger, Instagram girl, Instagram era, and I think of this bag. It was just compact, roughly the size of a camera case, hence the name Snapshot, had that boxy silhouette, zippered compartments, that double J logo hardware, the interlocking J's, centered. It was one of these styles where you could wear with these adjustable fabric straps, especially with like stripes and branding. It was functional, but it was loud. See how Marc Jacobs really pivoted to this era and like really owned it. It's also worth mentioning that there were other bags that used the similar branding, the St. Marc, the Little Big Shot, that were also very beloved bags, but something about this like crossbody, the Snapshot bag, just brings me back to 2016. Another extremely popular bag is the tote bag. Still a bag that the brand is still promoting. It exploded in popularity late 2010s into the 2020s. It's very like functional shopper tote bags. I think what people always talk about is the tongue-in-cheek branding, the tote bag. That is representative of Marc Jacobs' humor. Some people really dislike it, some people love it, some people love how like tongue-in-cheek and literal it is. But these styles came in a variety of different materials. Cotton canvas, the original, was very popular, but also leather, terry cloth, mesh. It has that very adjustable fabric strap. I think it just spoke to that everyday versatility, especially during the pandemic. I think this bag really had a moment, but this line expanded to the bucket bag, the sack bag, an endless range of bags that had the literal text on it. There was also that collaboration with Fendi, with the Fendi baguette text. This year, there was also the Steven Sprouse collab. Next, we have the Marc Jacobs Heaven baguette. So this was a very playful, nostalgic handbag that tapped into that Y2K revivalism through the lens of a Gen Z sort of focused diffusion line. Heaven by Marc Jacobs. It kind of spoke to that like alternative cool classic baguette style, short, rectangular, very high up, definitely evokes early 2000s style. Again, I think of the Fendi baguette, Dior saddlebag, that kind of era like reinterpreted for now, made with various fabrics, nylon, coated materials, puffy satin materials, graphic printed text. And then the last bag I wanted to mention here was the Marc Jacobs Dual Bag. It's a compact everyday handbag that blends a little bit more of a cleaner design, feels a little bit more modern, a little bit more functional, perfect for those who want style with subtle structure and utility. The compact rectangular silhouette, softly rounded side edges, mid-size, slightly wider than tall, ideal for that kind of on-the-go use. I think this bag appeals to people that want something a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more versatile, but not boring. Like, I think this bag is like a great city, casual kind of work bag, a subtle alternative to some of the flashier styles that we saw late 2010s. Marc Jacobs also just recently released the style, the Christina bag. So this debuted for fall 2025. Speaks to that kind of like ruched. Think of some of the styles from like Loewe to Miu Miu to the Row, a lot of these cinched type bags. But again, the appeal with Marc Jacobs is price points are never as expensive as some of the brands that I mentioned. For some people, this is their personal style, but for some people that may be curious about the trend, this is a great option. Marc Jacobs has always been one of these brands that responds to fashion of the times. He always, I think, brought like a sense of humor and playfulness. And when I look at his bags, I don't just see handbags. Like I see like the era of that it girl of the time, and I always think that's why it's so fun. He always captures that so well. Anyways, guys, that's my video for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.